Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. I'm joined tonight by Lloyd De Jongh from Warsaw, Poland, and we have a great show lined up. And I'm happy to have you on tonight, Lloyd. This is a very important topic. I've sort of avoided this issue for years. You have a very interesting background. Why don't you start off, and welcome to the show, but why don't you start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. Very briefly, South African. I spent 11 years in the Middle East, working in the Middle East, and which I very much enjoyed. However, the it was culture shock, and doing the work that I did, working in border security, critical infrastructure protection, national defense, I was curious as to what led to the culture that I was experiencing as I traveled across the Middle East. And the only way to really understand this was to begin to study the Islamic texts. And it started to explain the behavior that we were seeing, that I was seeing, and the behavior I was seeing around the world. And when, especially in 2015, when we started to see the Islamic attacks in the West increase sharply, I took a very intense interest in what was going on from the jihadis. I started reading the texts of Al Qaeda, um, and other groups. And I started to read the Islamic texts and to carefully jot down, comparing what I was reading to what I was seeing happening in the West. And it was an eye-opening education.
And you are a terrorism expert, is that correct?
Um, I was studying counterterrorism, and that's actually was one of the turning points for me. In that, when we, no, I was doing national defense, which is the protection of national borders and critical infrastructure from terrorism, from attacks, from sabotage. It was while I was doing a counterterrorism course that I learned how terrified the faculty were of talking about Islamic terrorism. We were doing a section on religious terror. We were free to talk about Christian terrorists, we were free to talk about Buddhist terrorists, and when it got to Islamic terror, it the discussion stopped dead. And there were numerous people on the course that were not within the field, let's say. They were simply there, as far as I could see, to cry foul the moment the discussion headed towards Islamic ideology.
All right. So, and you were in a class, and when this subject came up, didn't they actually kick you out of the class?
Yeah, we were
Because
discussing ISIS.
you were the actual expert, and they didn't, and none of them were, and they didn't want you to talk about the facts.
Correct. At the time, ISIS was heavily featured in the news. I'd come back from Iraq. I'd actually worked in northern Iraq. I'd been close to the ISIS front lines. I was doing some work out there. Um, what happened is that I posted some documents from captured that were captured by troops who'd liberated certain ISIS locations, and these aligned one to one with the standard Sunni Islamic texts. And when I posted these documents, it raised a huge outcry. And let's just say things became very uncomfortable. I was banned from the forum. I was not allowed to speak, and the outcry was raised by housewives, by these were people who were doing things like, I don't know, geography and so on, who were not professional in the field, but it raised such a stink that I eventually it was uncomfortable. I couldn't stay.
All right. So, and you also lived in Dubai for 11 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what did you see anything in Dubai going on, or was it peaceful there? Or
Dubai is in many ways very liberal, very modern. It is still run according to Islamic lines. The UAE is a great country. There's a lot to recommend. The leaders there are, shall we say, very forward thinking, but the same attitude is not prevalent across the rest or most of the rest of the Middle East. Oman's a very interesting country, very peaceful. However, Islam and the Sharia still very much prevail. The Sharia is the predominant law in the country. So there were certain very clear rules that you did not break. Otherwise, you would see the attitude change very quickly.
All right. So, and you have a rare level of expertise, and you're able to demystify a lot of the complexity around Islamic beliefs. Is that correct? And I want to be clear here that we're not here to bash or spin misinformation about Islam. We're here to speak specifically of the facts and the citations that you are an expert of.
Certainly, yeah. I've spent numerous years reading the Islamic texts, documenting them, creating my own database, which, as you know, I've shared with you and others. I've spent thousands and thousands of hours debating people online, and purely in an attempt to understand just what is going on. When terrorists shout Allahu Akbar and go on a killing spree, is this Islamic? Is this something that is supported by the foundational texts? So it is the political aspects of what these people are doing and how it impacts us as Westerners, as non-Muslims, that interest me.
And you have debated many hundreds of Muslims as well with this information as well, correct?
Yes, very much so.
And having studied all of this information, you were never swayed to convert to Islam either.
No,
Quite the
no.
contrary.
If you take few people, well, Islam is a very controversial subject. It is surrounded by emotion. There's not much fact to be found. It's deliberately obfuscated, in fact. But if you take a moment, and people don't really realize, the Sharia, Islamic law, can be found in a book. You can get a manual, and the most common, most popular manual is easily available for anyone. And when you read it, when you actually read what is contained in the Sharia, it is one of the most shocking things that you will ever encounter. It's insane. I was shocked by just what Sharia law encompasses.
And we're intending this to be a series, not just one episode. Boy, we already have 4 thumbs down. It looks like we're already upsetting some people, and we appreciate all of the others who aren't trolls and aren't suppressing the truth to thumb up this episode as well. We appreciate any help with that, and thank you everybody in the chat for your support. So what we want to do is well, let's talk about the Quran first. What can you tell us about the Quran? And I've read about 2/3 of the Quran, and I started posting some facts one day several months ago, and you stepped in and you corrected me, and I immediately realized that you had far more knowledge than I, and I wasn't about to debate you on this stuff, and that's kind of what led to today. You're kind of the expert on Islam, like I am on MK Ultra. So, let's dive into the Quran itself.
Thank you. Look, I understand this is it's a subject that does upset people, but my aim is not to be unkind, merely to be factually correct. So whatever we discuss, these are things that we will point to the necessary references and sources that anyone can look them up themselves and verify what we say is true. So, Yep.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
To set a foundation, everyone knows of the Quran, and everyone talks about it and discusses it as so this is the ultimate authority within Islam, certainly. However, what most people don't know is that any Muslim who only follows the Quran, who only references it, only lives by it, is considered what's called a Quranist or Quraniyun. Effectively, this person is outside of the mainstream. They're an apostate. And of course, apostasy in Islam is punishable by death. So these people would be on the fringes of Islam. And you'd think that if the Quran holds this level of authority, only that book would be necessary. But the Quran is a very incomplete book. It only contains about 150,000 words. So it's roughly the length of the New Testament. Now, the Bible is a self-contained book. The Quran lacks much of the necessary information. For instance, within the 5 pillars of Islam, if you look at the procedure for the 5 daily prayers, if you're looking for that information in the Quran, you will not find it. It's not there. So most don't know that to understand the Islam, you must not only have the Quran, which is the words of Allah, but also the life of Muhammad. And the life of Muhammad is contained in what's called the Sunnah. Now, the Sunnah is made up of two collections of books. You have the Hadith, and these are a collection of reports that describe the words, the actions, or the habits of Muhammad, essentially what he allowed and what he didn't allow, what he did, what he didn't do, what he recommended, what he didn't recommend, and so on. Then you've got the Sira, which is Muhammad's biography, and this the oldest biography, the most known biography is that collected by Ibn Ishaq, and it was then edited by Ibn Hisham. So you've got three books: the Quran, you have the Hadith collections. Now the Hadith are further broken into multiple different collections. You have the Sahih Hadith, which are Bukhari, which is regarded as the most holy, the most authentic and reliable collection of stories and little chapters, little paragraphs about Muhammad and his companions and his actions. And then you have Sahih Muslim. So Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, they have something like more than 4,000 of these little reports, these paragraph length stories about the traditions and the sayings of Muhammad in these books. You then have a second level of hadith, which are called Hasan, and then you have Da'if, which is weak, and then you have the false ones. Now, you will encounter, if you know about these and start quoting these hadith, that you'll find that, oh no, but those aren't authentic. Well, these are authentic. These are it's compulsory within Islam to believe these and accept these. And the reason you have the first three levels is that it cannot be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that a weak hadith is false. So it has been accepted. It is part of the canon. Now, it might be regarded as weak, but it is certainly not false. Now, and you will be told by many Muslims who don't like the fact that you're quoting their sources that these are not accepted, these are false, but that is not true. And the refutation of that is within the Sharia. The Sira is Muhammad's biography, and this essentially contains his, shall we say, his political history, his history of warfare and his political acts. Islam has multiple meanings. While it is a religion, statistically, only about 16% of the content of the Quran is actually related to, shall we say, religious aspects. And the balance is about politics, law, and warfare. So Islam is really a legal system. It is a political system, it is a social system, and a religious system. Because Muhammad was both a religious prophet in his early prophetic career, he was then a political leader, and then he became a military leader. That is how Muhammad progressed. And to be like Muhammad, you have to follow his progression. So the Hadith and the Sira together form what is called the Sunnah, the way or the path of Muhammad, the example of Muhammad. Like in Christianity, you have the Bible and the example of Jesus, the life of Jesus. So you have these books, you have the Quran, which is the word of Allah, the literal eternal word of Allah, and the Hadith and the Sira, which contain the life of Muhammad. I'll pause there if you have any questions or want any clarifications.
Yeah, no, we've already had to block two Islamic trolls in there who, before you even said anything, they were calling everything we've said so far as BS, you know. So I've already removed them, but so, you know, what we have to do, folks, is before you start screaming that things are false, listen to what's being said. Of course, we provide the trivium. I know that Islamists study and use the trivium, especially in the mosques, and many of them do not know that the trivium is actually the Holy Trinity, which apparently they're against. But so let's just, you know, continue on here. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, no, I wasn't saying anything. So the Quran has about 150,000 words. The Sira is just under 300,000 words, about 290,000 words. The Hadith of Bukhari is a bit over 640,000 words. So it's more than 4 times as long as the Quran. The Hadith plus the Sira is the Sunnah. And the Sunnah plus the Quran are the primary sources that make up Sharia, the Islamic sacred law. So they are the primary sources for Islamic theology and for the Sharia. Now, the Sunnah is the record of the teachings, the deeds, the sayings, and the permissions and disapprovals of Muhammad, as well as reports about his companions. These would be the equivalent of the apostles of Jesus, right? So when they speak of the rightly guided caliphs, these are the first 3 caliphs after Muhammad died who took over Islam and were responsible for its propagation. And Sunnah is defined as the path, the way, a manner of life, which makes Islam a social order as well. It's a civilization that competes with Western civilization. And as you study the sources, it seeks to obliterate it and replace it. So, and a final point is that Muhammad is considered to be the ideal Muslim, the perfect man, and his example is to be followed. So it is the highest aspiration of all good Muslims to follow the example of Muhammad and live as he lived. And his example is found within the Sunnah.
All right. So, okay. So, and then the Sunnah are the records of the teachings, deeds, sayings, permissions, and disapprovals of Muhammad. Do you want to go more into that?
Let me tell you what, let me set the foundation, finish setting the foundation,
Sure.
then we can get into some of the specifics there, okay? So very often when you do talk about the Quran, you read a verse and you see a verse in the Quran that's unpleasant. People talk about the 106, there's actually more than that, but the violent verses within the Quran, and they quote them. Well, the Quran often lacks context, and you often hear the argument, you're using that out of context. Now, this argument is very, very common, and it's used to delegitimize the use of the very uncomfortable passages within the Quran. And it is true, the Quran often makes statements that are very much out of context. Now, these books, the Hadith and the Sira, provide the necessary context to support what is said within the Quran. They flesh it out. So if you have a statement in the Quran that you want to utilize, you can find more about it in the Hadith. You'll find corroborating evidence based on the life of Muhammad. And you can also look in the Sira. Along with that, there are what's called the commentaries, which are written by very, very highly regarded scholars of Islam. And these are called the Tafsir. So if you want to look up further information with regards to a particular Quranic verse, you can go to the Tafsir collections. So you've got things like there's Tafsir Ibn Kathir, very popular, Tafsir al-Jalalain, to mention two that are very, very popular. So you can then refer to all of these sources. And if you look at a verse, you can go to the Tafsir and see what does it say about that verse, what context does it provide. And there's numerous different Tafsir authors that are highly regarded. And often you'll find that the Tafsir goes into further depth with regards to that. And so when you've got the Hadith, the Sira, the Tafsir, the Quran, they all merge, and the Sharia on top of that, when you have all of those as sources that link to a particular subject, then it's rock solid. You know that this is what it means. There's no doubt, because all of these sources align.
Now, somebody in the chat, Bahare, says tafsir basically means exegesis.
It means interpretation in the literal Arabic, but yeah, effectively this is that's the equivalent of Christian exegesis, yes. But don't forget, in Christianity, a Christian can read the Bible and come up with his own interpretation. He's allowed to do that, right? Whereas in Islam means submission. So Muslims are not allowed to make up their own interpretations. They are to submit. They're to follow the consensus. The consensus was set about 1,000 years ago. And to come up with your own interpretations is called bid'ah. It's a crime. This is the crime of innovation. Your job is to accept the existing consensus and simply follow it. So when people talk about interpretation, for most Muslims, that the Quran's not interpreted, it's merely obeyed.
And somebody is pointing out that it's about 1,432 years old, based specifically on Scalagerian chronology.
Scalagerian chronology, just fill me in there again, please.
Well, Scalagerian chronology was the rewriting of history from the 14th to the 16th century, inserting a 1,000-year period into the thing that we all call the so-called Dark Ages. It's more like a make-believe period. You can just delete the whole thing.
Yeah. No, understood. So, while we're at this, let me perhaps define a few terms so that we can try and get everyone on the same page, because Islam doesn't necessarily mean the same thing within its culture, within its context, as we accept it in English. Would it be okay if I just cover some of these points?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Islam, very often I'll engage in debate, and I engage in some heavy debates that go on for days. Now, people will say Islam means peace. No. In Arabic, the word salam means peace. That's why you say salam alaikum, peace be with you, right? Islam, while they do come from the same root, they're not the same word. Islam means submission to the will of Allah, right? Islam creates Muslims. Muslims don't create Islam. Islam creates Muslims. A Muslim is the one who has submitted to the will of Allah.
And it's not like a Christian submits to natural law and truth as God. It's a totally different type of submission.
Yeah, that's certainly something that's worth getting into. It's a different, you are the slave of Allah. For instance, I will discuss this as we go, but in Christianity, you regard God as your father. Whereas in Islam, you are God's slave, literal slave. And in fact, it's blasphemy to review God as your father. Now, Islam divides the world. It divides people and it divides the world. So the Islam divides the world into what's called the Dar al-Islam and the Dar al-Harb. The Dar al-Islam is the house of Islam, the Middle East effectively, where Islam has been established. And the Dar al-Harb is the house of war. And the house of war is in the process of submitting. Now, world peace in Islam, Islam being the religion of peace, is world Islam.
Now, talk about what do the Islamists mean when they say it's a world of peace? That means when everyone
has been submitted, then we will
Islam.
have peace.
Correct. It's not. Whereas in Christianity, everyone submits to truth and natural law. In Islam, everyone submits to Islam.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That is exactly what it is. Then you will have what's called the Dar al-Salam, the house of peace, once the entire world has been submitted. And this is not a voluntary submission. You will be submitted. So, and basically the Dar al-Salam is, a simple definition is, it's a term for countries where Islam can be practiced safely. There you have the Dar al-Salam. So the Ummah is another term that is very common. It's essentially the Islamic community. When you're a Muslim, you're a part of the Ummah, which is like a supranational state. You belong to the Ummah. You're a Muslim first before you're an American. You're a Muslim first before you're British. So you belong to the Ummah before you belong to the state, the nationality that you were born into.
Now, Albert Bishai says you have a dark agenda, and even though we're only stating facts specifically out of the books and texts themselves, of course, he doesn't state how you're distorting anything. He's just calling you a Zionist. And you are, in fact, a Christian. You're not a Zionist.
I've been raised Christian. However, as you stated as well, I just want to tell the truth. I want to bring facts. Everything I say can be verified, and I will provide all of the sources. When I go into my debates, I provide all of the sources, all the links, all the references, and these can be provided so that anyone is able to look them up and verify what I'm saying. Because, you see, I'm not going to necessarily just provide opinion. In fact, the Quran says, he who interprets the Quran or reads the Quran from personal opinion is in error. Right? Actually, that reference, he who reads the Quran from personal opinion is in error. That's actually within the Sharia, section 14.1, if I recall. We are going to utilize all of the most authentic, most sound, most trusted sources of Islam to actually understand it, so that we don't simply just use our opinion or the example of some Islamophobe. For instance, I often quote from the most trusted, the biggest Islamic website on the planet, which is Islam QA. And if these people are quoting falsities, then Islam is false. If these people are quoting falsehoods, then they are lying to millions and millions and millions of Muslims. Then they're committing blasphemy.
So you're getting your sources directly from there, and then these people that are saying that you're wrong, you're a Christian Zionist, this guy is now saying. Basically what they're trying to do is kill the messenger. But what you're saying is you're quoting directly from official Islamic sources, and that if they have an issue with what we're discussing here, they need to take it up with those sources. We're not trying to distort anything. We're not misrepresenting anything. We're just presenting the information itself.
Correct. Look, this is an information war. I honestly believe that, because there's so much distortion. There's so much propaganda out there, and I want to help people to know the facts and separate the truth from the propaganda. Further, Islam divides people into two categories. You have the Muslims and you have the kafir.
Kafir, right, which is what they call us, everybody who is basically an infidel.
Correct. And Muslims and kafirs,
infidels are supposed to be killed.
Yes. Kafirs are not equal to Muslims. Kafirs are not given the same legal status as Muslims. that is, I mean, if you want to give it a modern term, that is true apartheid, because you do not have the same rights under Islam as a Muslim does. So there is this very distinct separation within the theology and within the legal system, which if Islam becomes the dominant culture within the West, you will start to see that further and further oppression of women who have a lower status than men, and of the kafir who have the lowest status of all.
And we see that happening in Europe right now.
There are certainly issues in Europe, so definitely. I mean, Abraham Lincoln said at an address once, the world has never had a good definition of,
Now somebody, this guy, Yas Akir, sorry to interrupt you there.
Sure.
He's calling us names and saying it's a reference to Muslims that are apostates, not non-Muslims. This is BS, he says. Let's clarify that.
A reference to Muslims? Where is that? Sorry, but
he's saying that kafir is only a reference to Muslims, not to non-Muslims.
No, if you go through, as you start to go through the sources, you will discover that kafirs are non-Muslims. They're non-believers. That's easy. Anyone can look that up. That's very, very simple. A non-Muslim is, you see, for you to declare someone a non-Muslim who is a Muslim, that is to declare takfir. And you can't do that as just a Muslim. You need to get someone in authority to do that, because then you're declaring them an apostate, and that's the crime of ridda. Okay?
Right.
So they would be an apostate. We are the mushrikun. We are the people who do not believe in Allah. We do not believe in Islam. That's a different status. That's a different word. Typically, anything that is discussed in Islam will be contained somewhere within its sources, and its definition, its meaning, its legal status can be found in the Sharia or one of the other sources.
Right now, yeah, basically what the Islamists are doing is taking up name-calling rather than intellectual discussion here. Is that what you generally find, or?
Yes. But we are not supposed to, as kafir, to discuss the Islamic sources, to reveal their secrets, to discuss their intentions. And it's embarrassing. A lot of this is very embarrassing. It's very awkward.
Yeah,
and also,
it's all name calling. You're a Zionist puppet. You're an a-hole. You're dumb. This is the kind. I'm actually not allowing a lot of this stuff up here, but this person is obviously not interested in hearing what we have to say. They're just interested in name calling. And I'm wondering if they've even studied all of these sources themselves.
Very often they haven't. Very, very often they haven't. They'll send you to refer to a scholar. You need to get it from a fellow Muslim, but Muslims are not allowed to do their interpretation. Most of them are simply just, remember, they submit. They're told what to think. They're not told how to think.
Right.
They're given that. So, well, hopefully that sets a bit of a foundation in terms of the meaning, that how these words mean something different within Islam than they do within the Western context. So it's very important for us to be able to separate. And another point of confusion where people get really, really confused is the idea of moderate Muslims and extremists. Right. So this creates a lot of confusion, and I often get asked to talk about this. This whole thing comes up. Islam is Islam. It's indivisible. It's what it is. Now, people talk about, they provide different definitions, but this is very clearly defined, though, within the Sharia law, within Islamic sacred law. And again, anyone can look this up. We can provide the necessary references. People can look it up and read it for themselves. So we can provide the links. They can go to download the necessary sources, read them themselves. So within Islamic Sharia, there are two forms of Islamic obligation. Obligation within Islam is divided into what's called Fard al-Ain and the Fard al-Kifaya. These are personal obligation. Fard al-Ain is personal obligation as a Muslim, and Fard al-Kifaya is a communal obligation. Now, the practice of jihad, violent jihad, is Fard Kifaya, a communal obligation. There's even Quranic support for this, and I can get into this in detail now. Right now, I just want to give this overview. So they always talk about, well, it's only a small minority. Now, this also reflects it's called Tawriya. This is a form of Islamic deception. There are 6 forms of Islamic deception. Everyone talks about taqiyya. Taqiyya is not the only method of Islamic deception. There are 6 forms. The most common are Tawriya, Taysir, and Darura, ease and necessity. I'll get into those as we get through this, but So violent jihad is fard kifaya. It's a communal obligation. It is compulsory. It is obligatory. It falls upon the community such that someone has to perform it. And if no one performs it, then the sin of non-performance falls upon the entire community, and they are all basically damned. So the small minority must always participate in this jihad. Okay, so in the dictionary, certainly jihad is defined as a struggle, but in the Sharia, it is a legal term meaning warfare to establish Islam. Now, this is not common knowledge to most Muslims because they're attentive to their personal obligation, and this confusion gives cover to the jihadis. It means that they can operate. And so these are not extremists. These are Orthodox Muslims who are following the obligation of fard kifaya. This is not necessarily managed by, first of all, it's like distributed guerrilla warfare. Anyone at any moment can flip if they see a reason. And if they're the only one, in fact, if you go through the Sharia, they give the specifics. Under these conditions, you can then go and perform personal jihad. But also, the Sharia very clearly defines when and why and what. So, for instance, if we invade Muslim lands, then jihad becomes fard al-ain. All Muslims must fight back to force the invaders out. As in the Russians go into Afghanistan or America goes into Afghanistan, then jihad becomes fard al-ain. Everyone has to take responsibility. Also, there are multiple different kinds of jihad. There are numerous different kinds of jihad. I'll pause there.
Oh, no need to pause. You can keep going. I kind of lost our place in the notes. I was listening so much. So,
Okay,
and I was just reading the comments. Not one person other than Bahare is being constructive in their feedback. They're name calling and mostly calling you names and calling us Zionists and disinformation, all kinds of stuff. I've removed all of the comments, but there's been about 25 or 30 comments so far, and not one of them other than Bahare being constructive and considerate, And considering that we've taught critical thinking on this show for 9 years, I expect, more from everybody. And we don't see anyone, acting this way when we discuss Christianity or other religions. So, please, let's just settle down. If you are not familiar with these subjects, just listen until we cover them. We are going to be providing the direct primary sources for all of this. So, and that's kind of the point of this series is, just because it's contradicting what you've been told to believe or what you've specifically read doesn't mean that the subjects that we're covering aren't in the official Islamic texts.
Actually, let me go to the Sharia, right? Now, and I will read to you the official definition of the word jihad within the Sharia. Okay, so I'll start with this. This is Quran 9:121. Of every troop of them, a party only should go forth. Right? So of every troop, because what happened was Muhammad would conduct numerous raids, and the people who knew the Quran were being killed. And he created a stipulation that not all the warriors who knew the Quran should die. So some should remain behind so that the Quran would be preserved, so that the teaching would be preserved. Now, if we continue, if we go to now, the most utilized, the most sold, the most common, the most popular Sharia manual in the world is called the Umdat al-Salik, which is also known as the Reliance of the Traveler. This is the most endorsed, the most highly authorized translation of the Sharia in the world, in the Sunni Islamic world. It is incredibly thorough. It's a very, very highly endorsed book. And I mean, I'm happy to start after this, to provide the sources, necessary links to see how highly this book is regarded. Even Al-Azhar University, you might remember that President Obama back in the day did his speech in Cairo at Al-Azhar University, because that is the oldest and most highly regarded Islamic institution in the world. So Al-Azhar University endorses this book as completely authentic and completely in line with all of the stipulations of Sunni Islam. So jihad, fighting for the cause of Allah, jihad, chapter 9. Jihad means to war against non-Muslims and is etymologically derived from the word mujahada, signifying warfare to establish the religion. The scriptural basis for jihad, prior to scholarly consensus defined in B7, are Quranic verses such as fighting is prescribed for you, Quran 2:216. Slay them wherever you find them, Quran 4:89. Fight the idolaters utterly, Quran 9:36. And such hadiths as the ones related by Bukhari and Muslim that the Prophet said, I've been commanded to fight people until they testify that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And the hadith reported by Muslim, meaning Sahih Muslim in the hadith, so to go forth in the morning or evening to fight in the path of Allah is better than the whole world and everything in it. And then it goes on to say details concerning jihad are found in the accounts of the military expeditions of the Prophet, including his own martial forays and those on which he dispatched others. Okay, it says here he personally attended 27, some say 29 battles. He fought in 8, and various sources say that Muhammad personally killed 3,000 people.
Okay, now Bahare in the chat says, having read the actual text of the Quran in its original Arabic, I assure you that's not what it means. And she says it means someone who denies the signs of the Most High. What do you have to say to that?
I think she means kafir. So let's continue within the, so this is reading directly from the Reliance of the Traveler. Anyone can go online and look for this. So let's read this. I said, this is the most popular, most common Sharia manual on the planet. 9.1, the obligatory character of jihad. Jihad is a communal obligation defined in C 3.2. When enough people perform it to successfully accomplish it, it is no longer obligatory upon others. The evidence for which is the Prophet saying, he who provides the equipment for a soldier in jihad has himself performed jihad. It then goes on, if you look at section C 3.2, it defines the difference. A second distinction between obligatory acts is made on the basis of who is called to perform them. It then separates between Fard Ain and Fard Kifaya. And so that is there. And then if we continue, 9.8, the objectives of jihad. It says the Caliph makes war upon Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians. He first invites them to enter into Islam in faith and practice, and to pay what's called the poll tax, which is actually tribute, called the jizya. And if not, he fights them.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty clear, you know.
Yeah, that's Sharia law.
And you're not just reading only the Quran, you're going by the Sharia and the other texts as well that lay out the laws of Islam.
I mean, for instance, let's see. Let's look at Tabari. He is one of the most common, most highly regarded tafsir commentators, one of the people who provide exegesis. So let's look at Tabari 9:69. We are the helpers of Allah and the viziers of his messenger, and we fight people until they believe in Allah. He who believes in Allah and his messenger has protected his life and possessions from us. And one who disbelieves, we will fight him forever in the cause of Allah, and killing him is a small matter to us.
All right. Okay, so let's see. Where did we leave off here in the notes?
Yeah. So those are, well, I can go either back to some of the, let me add one more passage. So just that people, let's look at the Sira, which is Muhammad's biography. When Allah gave permission to his apostle to fight, the second oath of allegiance at Aqaba contained conditions involving war, which were not in the first act. Now, Muhammad's followers bound themselves to war against all and sundry for Allah and his apostle. And I think that that's pretty clear. You know, that is very, very clear there. And yeah.
All right. Now, the Hadith and the Sira equals the Sunnah of Muhammad. Do you want to talk about that?
Okay, so Hadith plus Sira equals the Sunnah. This is the way of Muhammad. So you remember, you've got the book of Allah, and you've got the example of Muhammad. So you have the book, and you have the man, which is Muhammad. Muhammad is regarded as the perfect Muslim. He went through different phases in his life. So thus, Islam is thus revealed in stages. First, he was a religious leader, and not a successful religious leader. When he was in Mecca, he was a prophet for about 12 years, according to the Sira, and he only converted about 70 people in the first 12 years. And he then, once he became a political and military leader, he then was able to raise the funds he needed and raise the army he needed to make Islam successful. which was enforced by the sword. So anyone who wants to be a good Muslim would follow the Sunnah of Muhammad, and this was his progression from peace to violence. Now, if you look at the Bible, it goes from the Old Testament to the New Testament, from more violent to peaceful, in the example of Jesus. But if you look at the Quran, it is completely the opposite, from more peaceful to more violent. And what people don't realize is the Quran is not arranged in chronological order. It is arranged by length of chapter. It starts with the
correct. And like I said, I've read a lot of it, and I know that I wish I had brought my Quran downstairs, but I'll make sure I do that for the next episode.
Okay, let's go back to some of what I was discussing. So, for instance, let's see. So, people talk about out of context. Let's have a look. I mean, let's actually have a look at this. So, we can then look at, say, Quran 434.
You know, let me just interrupt you there, Lloyd. If you want to share screen there, you can do that, and you can show some of these texts on screen if you'd like.
How do I share my screen? Just click the share button?
Yeah, well, if you hover over in the middle of the bottom, there's a green button that says share, and then just share whichever monitor you're using if you want to do it that way.
Different ones all the time. So let me see if this is... Okay, this one should do it. And hit share. Okay, so this is my browser. Okay, let us have a look here. We can use the Quran, chapter 434, a very controversial chapter because this discusses the beating of women. Again, another question that comes up and something that causes great controversy. Now, my aim is not to deliberately embarrass people. I simply want to get to the bottom of this and provide the facts. So, Quran 434, as for women of whom you fear rebellion, not women who have rebelled, but fear rebellion, admonish them, remain apart from them in beds, and beat them. Different translations will use the word nudge or other words, but when you take the Arabic text, which is often included within these Qurans, and you paste that into, say, Google Translate, you will get to the word beat. So we can look at things like this. So if we go to Quranics, which claims to be the most complete Quran, Tafsir, and Hadith website in the world, men are in charge of women. The feminists may or may not have something to say about that. Okay, but it says, as for those from whom you fear rebellion, admonish them and scourge them. Okay, and finally strike them. Okay, and then beat them. Now the word lightly here, if you look at this does not appear in the original translation. This was added to soften. Now we can look here for multiple different translations. So to go back to that, so we can also then get more clarity on this from the Tafsir al-Jalalain. We can look at Tafsir Ibn Kathir and the Tafsir of Maududi. Let's look at Tafsir al-Jalalain. So it says here, men are in charge of women. Okay, they have to keep them in check. Let's see. And those you fear may be rebellious, not women who have rebelled, but those from whom you fear may be disobedient to you. When such signs appear, okay, and strike them. Now it says here not violently. For us to really determine if this is so, we need to go to the original Arabic translation and check that. But let's continue rather. Let us go to, okay, I'm going to go to, can you see this part of the screen? This is my
Absolutely,
database.
Yes.
Okay, so I will go here.
Well, I'm seeing what's on the Quran verse commentary still.
Oh, okay, so maybe I need to share something different.
Or if you share to Windows specifically, you'll have to unshare that. You know, it's easier to share a monitor, but it drives people crazy.
How do I share the monitor? Screen.
Yeah, when you
main screen. Just share the main screen. Right. Okay. I'm sharing my main screen. Okay.
There you go.
That should do it. So let's go to on women. Okay. Okay. So let's look at the examples. You have the example of Muhammad, which has to be followed. Okay. If we look at, for instance, this is Aisha, Muhammad's wife, whom he married at 6, he consummated at 9, and he says, he struck me on the chest, which caused me pain. So Muhammad hit his own wife. Okay. This is, I can go to the reference here, Hadith collection. Okay. It says here, At-Tabari, another tafsir, Allah permits you to shut them in separate rooms and to beat them. Okay. Now it says here, Sahih Bukhari, the most highly regarded Hadith collection, the Prophet said, none of you should flog his wife as he flogs a slave and then have sexual intercourse with her in the last part of the day. Okay. This is from the Sharia. Okay. So when you fear rebellion, so dealing with a rebellious wife, you may hit her. Okay, there is a stipulation, not in a way that injures her. Okay, he may not break her bones, wound her, or hit her in the face. Okay, it says here he may hit her whether she is rebellious, only once, but a weaker opinion holds that he may not hit her unless there's repeated rebelliousness. And then, well, it goes on to say it is not lawful for a wife to leave the house except by the permission of her husband. And if keeping her is ineffectual, it is permissible for him to hit her. His hitting her may not be in a way that injures her. Now, that we can't assume that everyone who interprets the Quran is necessarily a genius or a scholar or knows all of these details, or someone who's angry and is willing to hit women is able to control himself and not hit her in such a way that it doesn't break her bones or doesn't hit her in the face.
All right. And yeah, there you go. Thank you. All right, so Albert is really upset in the chat, and he's saying, what this guy doesn't know could fill a book. I like you, Jan, but this is a huge distraction from the real enemy. Stop blaming the victims, he says. Is that true? Are they only the victims? Or, I mean, you literally just quoted the Quran and these texts directly, and so why are they saying that they're the victims when all we are doing is literally quoting the text themselves?
One of the confusions and one of the weapons as well used to confuse is to conflate Muslims with Islam. Muslims are people. People have different motivations. People have different levels of knowledge, different levels of commitment, different motivations, right? Islam is an ideology. This is the ideology. This is the scripture. This is the doctrine. The doctrine is unchanging. The doctrine is eternal. Muslims that don't follow this, well, I think we should be grateful that they don't. Many of them look at this and go, no, this is not for me. Many of them are not aware of this. Many of them reject this.
So because they're not aware of it, they're calling you the ignorant one. Is that basically what we're getting? Okay.
But this is the doctrine. You see, now think about this. Let's say America becomes an Islamic state. This then becomes the law of the land.
Right, exactly. Now, let me ask you this. Anthony asks, what is the most authoritative translation of the Quran in the U.S. market? And I have the Tajweed translation and one other one that I use.
There are numerous ones. Just that some of the newer translations, because of the internet, remember, most of these texts were only translated from 1995 onwards. So they've only been in the world just over 20 years. So what you have is it's only recently that people are starting to actually read these texts and get they've just been made available. So the Noble Quran is a very common one. I tend to refer to the Arbery and the Yusuf Ali and various others. I tend to use more than one because I try to, some of them have been rewritten to make them less controversial, less violent, to make them more Western friendly. So I would be very careful. And don't forget, deception of the kafir is legal within Islam. It is allowed.
It's just like in the Jewish Talmud, they're allowed to lie to the goyim, for instance.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Except,
whereas Christianity, you are not allowed to lie at all because lies are Satan is the father of all lies.
Correct.
All right.
Correct. So then continuing just with that, just to use that example.
You know what? And while you were talking, just keep going for a minute, or if you want to share a screen, I'm going to go grab my Quran if you don't mind. All right.
Okay, you do that.
All right.
Okay, so I've provided sources. These are all primary sources. Those were the Quran. I provided sources from the Sharia, from the Tafsir, and from the Hadith. There are numerous various sources that one can look for within the Hadith. If I were to go back, we can look at, okay, I will share my screen and you can see this yourself. It says here in Sunan Abu Dawud, Hadith 2147, the Prophet said, a man will not be asked as to why he beat his wife. I think that's pretty clear. So a man will not be asked as to why he beat his wife. So how do you interpret that? How do you interpret the instruction from Muhammad himself that a man will not be asked why he beat his wife? That does leave license. Now, let's say you have someone who's not very well versed in all of the entire Islamic exegesis, and he sees only this hadith. What does he take away from that? And what kind of change does that invoke within the society? Look at this. This is within the Sharia. A people that leave its leadership to a woman will never succeed. Okay? So This is the kind of attitude that is forever enshrined within the Islamic scriptures and thus in the Islamic doctrine. Do you have any questions, Jan? Jan? Or Jan?
Jan.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. Let's see what. Well, here I was just going to show this copy here. This is one of the copies that I have, and this is the other copy that I have, and I actually go, use the translations between the two. This one has the English and Islamic text, and it has a English transliteration next to it so that you can learn to pronounce the words and everything all along. So it's actually English, Arabic, and then transliteration on this side here. But that's the tajweed if people want to go by that. But, I've read a good, I don't know, I'm about 2/3 through it here. I'm in Saba 34.
Okay. Online, I utilize mostly, not only, but a site called Quranx.com, which is Quranx.com. They claim to be the most complete. And as far as I can tell, they are a very, very thorough website. They have about 19 different translations of the Quran. They have numerous hadith, numerous tafsir, and various other resources. So they are very, very useful. But hopefully that shows you that within the Quran, within the hadith, within the Sharia, and within the tafsir, there are clear indications that it is legal within Islam for a man to beat his wife. That is not within doubt. All of these sources line up. And I mean, there are more sources. That's not every one that exists, but certainly I think I've given a sampling that shows that this is not an accident. And Muhammad says, a man will not be asked why he beat his wife.
Yeah, just watch the desk because that comes through
My
there.
bad. Okay, so to move on then. Okay, so if we look at the passages about Allah within the Quran are only about 14% statistically of the total content. The remaining 86% of the Quran is about Muhammad. So Allah only makes up 14% of the book itself. So the bulk of it is really just about Muhammad. But then oddly, Muhammad's only mentioned 4 times in the Quran, and Jesus is mentioned 15 times.
Isn't it 24 times?
It may be, but so I mean, my aim is not to get into the theology. But this is simply just food for thought, things to think about. Okay, now a Muslim is to follow the example of Muhammad, who is the ideal pattern of conduct, the ideal Muslim, the perfect man. So, and this is stated in the Quran 91 times. Okay, so these commands take 2 forms: historical examples and direct commands to follow Muhammad as the ideal moral example for all Muslims to follow. If Muhammad does something, it is both legal and moral within Islam. Oh, my window just blew up and it's snowing outside.
Oh.
So now another thing for people to know is that the Quran has what's called an early period and a late period. Okay, these are often referred to as the Meccan Quran and the Medinan Quran. And these two have wildly contradictory verses. So Muslims will often, and they know these, and they honestly believe that this is all there is. And they often weren't told by the imams that there's more to it, but they get given these good verses, these happy verses.
It's called abrogation. Is that what we're getting into?
But now we have what's called nasik wal mansuk. Okay, the abrogating and the abrogated. This again is covered within the Sharia. Right, now remember, the Sharia is law for eternity, for all time. It can never be changed. So it is very easy to find deeply contradictory verses within the Quran. And the law of abrogation, or the principle of abrogation of the doctrine, tells us that a chronologically later verse is theologically better than an older one. So what is newer erases, cancels, replaces older verses. Right? So remember, the confusion also stems that the Quran is not arranged chronologically. It is arranged by length of chapter. The first chapter is a very short chapter called the Fatiha, the opening, and then you have the longest to the shortest, right? Now, within Islam, both of these contradictory verses will stand as true, right? The Western concept of logic, where one cancels the other, does not apply. The disqualification does not apply. Yes,
right. Because in logic is logos. Logic comes from the word logos. Logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. So whenever you have 2 contradictory views, you have to dig down until there are no more contradictions in existence. Now,
right.
But one thing that I do find interesting is that on page 1, line 6, show us the straight way, the way of those whom thou bestow thy grace, whose portion is not wrath, and who go not astray. Now, that sounds, the straight way sounds that they are talking about the way of truth over all else, but is there a different meaning to that?
So it depends on the translation you look at. So that is, if you go to the Muhsin Khan Quran, okay, that's Quran 167, right?
Correct.
That is called the Fatiha, the opening prayer of the Quran. And I'll read this. It says, guide us to the straight way, the way of those on whom you've bestowed your grace, not the way of those who've earned your anger, such as the Jews, nor of those who went astray, such as the Christians. That is the actual text of the Muhsin Khan version.
And then there's other texts that say that the Jews and Christians are okay, but then there's later texts that abrogate or that refute that, correct?
Muhammad wanted to be regarded as a prophet in the Abrahamic line, and he was not accepted by either the Jews or the Christians. Remember, in the first 18 months of Islam, he used to pray towards Jerusalem. And then when the Jews refused to accept him as a prophet, he rejected them. He hated them. He turned violent on them. And he then started praying towards Mecca.
All right. And again, keep in mind, folks, that in Christianity specifically, a prophet is the person who lives most in truth.
Right. So to continue with this idea of abrogation, so Nasik wal Mansuk, the abrogating and the abrogated. So both verses stand. So it depends, where are we within Islam? Where am I currently? So depending on the conditional and need, I can present one verse, and depending if I'm in a different situation, I follow the other verse. So both of these are true, and they're both utilized as appropriate, as long as it benefits the Muslim or Islam. Right? So Islam is it's got a dualism, it's got a duality to it that most of us don't understand, that we don't realize is there. We assume we see it with Western eyes. We don't see it from the perspective of the culture within Islam. And for instance, in Quran 2:106, we've got, and for whatever verse we abrogate or cast into oblivion, we bring a better or the like of it. Knowest thou not that God is powerful, or Allah is powerful over everything? And when we substitute a verse, Quran 16:101, and when we substitute a verse in place of a verse, they say, you, O Muhammad, and people were doubting this, are but an inventor of lies, but most of them do not know. So there was already doubt as to how the message was changing over time. This is regarded theologically as Islam is revealed over time, depending on where you are. So following Muhammad's example, there's 91 verses that say, follow the example of Muhammad. In this situation, he did this. In that situation, he did something else. Well, so we can, there's no consistency there. There's no single absolute rule of behavior.
Okay, now somebody is saying you are mixing truth with falsehood. What do you have to say to that?
I am simply quoting straight out of the Islamic books. These are the most authoritative books. I mean, you can go to Quranics.com. You can check everything I've said. Quran 16:101, Quran 2:106, and you can download a copy of the Sharia, and you can absolutely read that for yourself. It's discussed within the Sharia as well. If I go to my notes on abrogation, let's have a look. So I didn't write this. I'm simply reading it. Okay.
And why don't you show this on screen? And this guy, Lars Bendixson, is saying, check out Saheed Lippman.
I don't know who that is. So you can go to various Islamic websites. Now, if we go to islamreview.com, which talks about the doctrine of abrogation. Now, I don't own this website. I didn't write the articles on this website. It's, again, one of the bigger, best known, most common articles on the subject. Now, is this Muslim a racist and Islamophobe for writing this? I'm simply quoting what they're saying. Now, you can look at the verse in which, three kinds of abrogation, verses in which both the wording and application were abrogated. I'll skip on that. Let's look at the reliance, O22.1. To become a qadi, or an Islamic judge, you have to know those nasik which supersede previously revealed Quranic verses. An Islamic judge has to know which verses have been abrogated and those mansuk. So the nasik, the abrogating, and the mansuk, the abrogated. So it is a necessity to become an Islamic judge to be able to tell which is which. Okay. And then it also says here, explain the Quran by personal opinion. Okay, whoever speaks of the book of Allah from his own opinion is in error. So if you want, and the generality of prohibition also entails that whoever does not know which verses abrogate others and which are abrogated, that is in the Sharia. That is the ultimate law of Allah. This is the abrogation is irrevocable. It's for all time.
And Thomas von Klutzeben says, you have to know Lloyd personally to know he's a straight shooter. He does his homework, people, so you better listen.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. I mean, these things, so and we can go into...
let's kill your share screen so we can see you there.
Certainly.
We're seeing your desktop.
I can go into further references. We can go into the Tafsir. We can go into other sources that say the very same thing. So when multiple of these Islamic sources all corroborate exactly the same thing, that is the situation. I mean,
now, and I want to point out, it's like you have the official version of the psychedelic counterculture in the 60s and all of that, and then you have all of the documentation and evidence that I've exposed that 100% contradicts all of that and exposes that. And, so what you're showing is the primary citations and everything that people can follow up and study for themselves. We're showing them on screen. So, and simply for a woman is saying he's just reading what others have written, not always true what people write. What do you have to say to that? I mean, you just read right out of the, what it requires to be a judge, et cetera. That's not your interpretation. That is simply what, look, poetry is interpreted. Okay. The law is followed, right? Rules are followed. That's a very clear instruction. I mean, that whole idea of, you're interpreting that, no, Muslims are not allowed to do any interpretation. They simply have to obey what is written. That is the Islamic consensus. That is the law. That is Sharia. Now, I've provided multiple proofs, and I have more that I could add. And in fact, if I had to dig further, I could probably find significantly more. Another thing is that people claim the Quran is completely, now this is a completely different subject, but let's maybe not go there. I was talking about the verse we discussed earlier about the goat or the sheep. But we can skip that. Let me go to something else, rather. Let me just continue with... Lars says, this is so much deeper and complex than anything you are saying.
Well, thanks. I take it that is a... oh, gosh. Now my machine is... You can hear me fine?
Yes.
Yeah, my hard drive is thrashing at the moment for some reason. I bought a new SSD, and it is... Oh, good grief.
Bahare is so awesome. She says, I hope we can all remain open-minded and untriggered. And thank you, Bahare, for your donation, and Polygonal. This is just an awesome woman. She's been a listener of the show for a long time, and I really appreciate her.
She's Iranian?
Yeah, I think so, something like that. But yeah, she's a really, good listener and long-time fan of the show, etc.
So have there been any other questions coming from anyone who's watching this, who's listened to what I'm saying?
Well, Lars says, wrong. There are 3 levels: blind follower, muqallid, a follower based on proofs, and mutabi, a person who can make the rulings, a mujtahid, and what you said is not true, they're saying. You see...
Lars Bendixson. I've actually seen this name before. I think I've come across this person online in the past. Look,
is this one of your trolls or something?
No. I've engaged in thousands of hours of debate over many years with hundreds and hundreds of people, and so look, I'm trying to give a bit of an overview so that people understand how all of this fits together.
Yeah, she says she's Iranian, Persian.
Okay, yeah, no, I met many Iranians when I was in the Middle East. Okay, so we've defined a few terms, okay, about the difference between moderates and extremists, how that is defined within Sharia. Now, let me just go through a bit of a historical narrative, I think, and we can start to ask questions, and this gives us, but I think I've laid a foundation for understanding of the scripture and the doctrine.
Okay, and just to point out, folks, this is just episode 1 of a series that Lloyd and I have planned, so, all we're doing is very introductory stuff today. And, we still have a lot more to cover and additional shows. In fact, we're already past an hour. Wow, that went really fast. But,
Okay, so
if people want to ask specific questions in the chat, we'll do our best to answer them. Thanks, Sanchez, Mr. Funny Man.
Yes, Abraham. That's fascinating.
Lloyd is
Lloyd,
what they're doing is name calling at you mostly. You're a
no,
Hebrew, you're a Zionist, you're, this and that. It's just
I'm a black guy from Africa.
infantile, half German black guy from Africa,
Yeah.
infantile name calling and this sort of stuff. Let's not rely on ad hominem attacks. What we're looking for is people who are going to cite things in the chat and provide actual citations that we can discuss. This is not a name-calling frenzy, folks. Grow up.
See, so understand, everything within Islam is defined within the Sharia, within the Sunnah, within the Quran. There's always a reference to it. There's always a reason for it, right? So you should be able to link to some kind of source to prove any kind of claim. So opinion is not accepted. You need to be able to refer to some kind of source. And I think people need to be held to the standard of citing the sources. Now, if we know what the sources are, we can actually going to have a look at them and see if we have a legitimate case for believing what we do.
And if somebody has a correction that they can offer up, let's see them post it. I'm tired of them name calling. Just
Correct.
Post the corrections. That's all you have to do.
Correct. So, okay. So what is true in Islam? And now there's one authority that we can follow within Islam, and that is Muhammad. Right now, I don't talk about Muslims. I don't slander or disparage Muslims. I talk about Islam as an ideology, and we can refer back to Muhammad. He's the perfect Muslim. He's the best example of the religion of Islam. So he's the best Muslim that ever lived. His life is the Sunnah. Okay, so his life went through 3 stages, and by understanding the 3 stages, we gain an insight into those who are trying to be like him. He had a religious, political, and a military stage in his career. Okay, so shall I spend a few minutes just going through some of the history? As I told you, I wrote and I can go through some of that. So Muhammad is born in 570 AD, right? This is after 5 centuries of Christianity, and the Roman Empire is now Christian. So the Byzantine Empire is under attack by the Persian Empire. The two exhaust each other in battle, and into this power vacuum comes Islam, right? Muhammad's father dies before his birth. Now, for this, I need to credit William Federer, a fantastic resource, a man who knows the subject very, very well. So, and there are other sources I would recommend as well: Bill Warner, Robert Spencer, and also a guy called Raymond Ibrahim, who writes some fantastic stuff on the subject. These are scholars, and their work is very detailed. The histories are very good. But so, his father dies before his birth. His mom dies at 6, and his grandfather and guardian dies when he's 8. So he's taken in by a rich merchant uncle called Abu Talib. And this merchant uncle takes him on camel rides throughout Arabia. And remember, Arabia was Christian, pagan, and Jewish at that time, okay? Arabia had 360 pagan religions, okay? These were Canaanite fertility gods, generally, or variations of those, and also they were indulged in rock worship. The pagan Arabs indulged in rock worship. Now, the most popular god...
Like the rock idols, but bump.
Let's not go there. So the most popular god would be the Allah for the town. Now, the word al, from my research as I've looked at it, it's a reference to the Jewish word or the Hebrew word el, which is for God. Okay, and La, for instance, would be the name, the noun, the name of that god. But the Allah for that town. So Huwal, the moon god, was the Allah for the large city of Mecca, then called Yathrib, if I recall. So their calendar began with the first sighting of the crescent moon over the desert, and Muhammad incorporated this into his religion. Okay, Zoroastrians, again, who were also fighting the Christians at the time, believed that paradise was filled with virgins that would fulfill all your desires. This was incorporated, as was the belief in jinns or genies. The term genius originally meant not someone who was smart, but someone who was followed by a spirit, a genie, who gave him all the answers. The Arabian Jewish community had oral traditions that he also incorporated, because according to the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sira, he was illiterate. Okay, so the Quran was not written down as a book until well after his death, and the Arabic verses had a rhyme to them which allowed easier memorization. So the story is he was in a cave in 610 AD praying when a spirit squeezed him and told him to recite. This happened numerous times, and apparently the result of this was he was terrified He attempted suicide. He became suicidal, and he believed he was possessed. This is going to be a very rough guide. So now the Christian gospel was known to Muhammad through apocryphal and heretical sources. One of those, for instance, being the infant gospel of Thomas. Now, he was illiterate and he learned all these stories without having read them or having written them down. So he believed that the Holy Trinity was the Father, Mary, and Jesus. And most Muslims today also believe that that is the Christian conception of the Trinity, the Father, Mary, and Jesus, right? Not the Holy Ghost. He was unaware of that. He was unaware of the Holy Spirit. So many Muslims today believe this, that we worship Mary, the Father, and Jesus. Now, within Arabia, where Muhammad traveled and lived, there were numerous heretical sects. Now, to mention four of them: Arianism. Jesus was mostly man, but a little bit God. There was Nestorianism, where it was believed Jesus was mostly God and a little bit man. Then we had Docetism. Jesus was completely God. And then there was Ebionism, where Jesus was completely man. And this is the conception of the Quranic Jesus, the Islamic Jesus. So he was married to his first wife, Khadija. When he was 25, she was 40, and he was married by her cousin, who was an Ebionite priest. And Muhammad learned this heretical Christian interpretation from this man. I believe his name is Waraka. So he was part of a sect that Jesus was just a man. Okay, so he's excited about this new religion. He goes to Mecca to preach, and he makes 70 converts in 12 years. He hangs around the Kaaba. He's very frustrated. He becomes confrontational. He begins insulting the pagans. He tells them they're all going to burn in hell. And when his rich uncle dies, the Meccans decide enough. And they say that Muhammad is a disturber of the peace. And they chase him out of town. He goes to a town called Taif. I've actually been to that. I've actually been there. So in Taif, they reject him. They pelt him with rocks. And he's now a refugee. So he then flees to the Jewish town of Medina, who let him in as an immigrant. Does this sound familiar?
Oh, sure it does.
So the Hijra, this is called the Hijri, the immigration. The Hijra calendar, the Islamic calendar, this is year one of the Islamic calendar. This event is so important, so critical within Islam, that this becomes the first year of the Islamic calendar, when Muhammad immigrated. Okay, immigration is a form of jihad within Islam. It is one of the forms of jihad. Someone who dies during immigration, during hijrah, is guaranteed heaven. So he then organizes a following amongst those who have grievances with the Jewish government in Medina and those who feel victimized, right? He pressures the Jews into making political accommodations. So this is part of the Sunnah of Muhammad. You make political accommodations once you have the ability to enforce this. He's now a political and a religious leader. His followers in Mecca, they start disturbing the peace by being confrontational, the example of Muhammad. They too are thrown out of Mecca and they become refugees. They go to Medina, okay, where he allows them to rob Meccan caravans in retaliation for being thrown out of town. So now contrast this with the example of Jesus. If they take your coat, give them your shirt. Muhammad robbed people for perceived slight. So if you look at Quran 8.8, Surah 8, verse 8, is about distributing booty from caravans. Muhammad receives 20% of all booty taken from these caravans. He then conducts, according to the Sira, 66 or more raids and battles in his next phase as a successful military leader until his death. During the siege of Taif, he's using catapults, and he learns that there are women and children amongst those that are being killed during the bombardment. His reply is, they are from them. In other words, continue. It's reported in the authority of Sab Jantama that the Prophet of Allah, when asked about the women and children of the polytheists being killed during the night raid, said they are from them. Sahih Muslim 4322. And also Sahih Bukhari 52-256. So now one could argue, and I have notes here, that, for instance, you will often be told in debates and that, he wouldn't kill women and children, but the example of Muhammad very distinctly shows that he did. He murdered numerous women and children. Okay, I can go into detail here, but I'll skip that just for brevity's sake. We can always go back into that in the future.
And I want to ask you a question too when you're done.
Sure. No, go on. No, I'll stop you. You ask a question.
Well, I wanted to ask if in the Islamic world, if they understand the concept that Jesus is Logos or truth incarnate.
No, Jesus in Islam is a man. He's not divine. In fact, it is blasphemy to consider him divine. It is blasphemy to consider him the son of God, because God is Tawhid. God is one, unitary, single. You'll see people having this sign, like ISIS and other Islamic. It's a typical Islamic symbol. I believe in the one God. the unified God, not just the one God, but the unified God who has no partners. The supreme crime, the supreme sin in Islam is shirk. Shirk comes from the Arabic, basically means sharing, where you assign partners to God. That is the one unforgivable sin that will never let you into heaven, into the Islamic paradise. And we are polytheists in that we worship three gods. Understand, that is their conception, as I discussed earlier. So we are doomed to hell unless we convert to Islam. So, and so Jesus is not considered, he's considered a prophet of Allah. He's not considered divine, although the Quran does make reference to his virgin birth and to other qualities of his that Muhammad doesn't emulate. So that's a bit of a weird contradiction there. Okay, so in 627 AD, Mecca is suffering due to the raids on the caravans, okay, by Muhammad's followers. And of course, the money he's making obviously enables them. So a coalition of 10,000 soldiers are sent to Medina. So it turns out Muhammad's a brilliant military leader. He's creative, he's unconventional, he's unpredictable. He doesn't operate by the rules of warfare common at the time. Now, so Muhammad digs these potholes, which prevents the cavalry of the enemy from entering and attacking the city, right? And ultimately, after a very cold week during winter, the remaining troops, they lose heart, the siege ends, they go home. This reprieve emboldens Muhammad, okay? He then decides he's going to take over the city, and he gets offended by the first Jewish tribe, whoops his followers into a frenzy, attacks the neighborhood, chases the Jews out, claims their property. Repeat and repeat. With the third tribe, now he had treaties in place, and he establishes now precedents on a practice called hudna. Essentially, make treaties when weak, and when you are strong, disregard and violate those treaties. Okay, so now if you look at Quran 9.1, freedom from all obligations is declared from Allah and his messenger to those of the mushrikun, the polytheists, pagans, idolaters, and disbelievers, with whom you made a treaty. Quran, chapter 9 of the Quran is the final chapter, the final complete chapter of the Quran, which was written not long before Muhammad died. And it also, so it essentially abrogates all preceding Quranic verses and Quranic chapters. So he barricades the third Jewish tribe for 25 days. And when they surrender, he beheads all the males from the age of 12. So anyone who shows signs of pubic hair, he kills. Now, story goes he beheaded up to 700 people himself. But he sells the women and children into slavery. Within 5 years of entering Medina as a refugee, he has chased out, killed, or enslaved all the Jews that were in the city. Within 5 years of his death, he has eliminated all other cultures in Arabia. And within 5 years of his death, also, the Muslim armies have invaded 28 countries.
And we're going to go into that a lot more. I just wanted to read Sura 3:45. Behold, the angel said, O Mary, Allah giveth thee glad tidings of a word from him. His name will be Christ Jesus, the Son of Mary, held in honor of his world and the hereafter, and of the company of those nearest to God.
Yeah, but it is blasphemy to believe in Jesus, because Islam denies the Trinity, denies the divinity of Christ, denies his death, denies his resurrection.
Which is odd when they use mosques. A friend of mine went to a mosque, and they immediately, he asked them about the trivium, and they started discussing it, but they didn't realize that the trivium's relationship to the Holy Trinity, which is about seeking truth, which, Christians understand truth as God.
Yeah, well, don't forget, it is lawful to lie to the kafir within Islam, right? That is allowed. People know about taqiyya, but there are 6 different forms, and also these allow Muslims to live a life that is not necessarily Islamic for the sake of getting along or allaying suspicion. So do you have any questions? Are there any questions in the chat that can be maybe answered?
Let's see. There's lots of hyperbole and name calling. Let's see. Bahare and one other person offering some good stuff. I wish they would post up more citations. Lars, before we do next week's show, I'm going to ask you to do actual study and bring up real points and offer real citations. So that this is so that we have a valid conversation and not just
He says that we believe Jesus is a prophet. Okay, they say we believe in Jesus, but it is the Quranic Jesus, not the Christian Jesus. Because Islam completely rejects the Christian conception of Jesus.
Right. And I've seen that, and repeatedly in the Quran, and I may have it flagged here. I'd have to go through. I have one highlighted and one flagged, but they say that, they totally reject the idea of the Holy Trinity, like you've already said.
Well, if you look at, let's take the Diyanet, which is the religious authority in Turkey. That's the Religious Council of Turkey. That's their official religious body. They officially reject and do not recognize Christianity or Judaism as legitimate. And they use Quran 2:140 as their source. Or do you say that Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob and their descendants were Jews or Christians? Say, are you more knowing, or is Allah? It is completely contrary to facts to claim that the prophets were Jewish or Christian. According to them, they were all Islamic.
Yeah, and Bahare points out, well, Islam does not, and you've already mentioned this, Islam does not reject the Immaculate Conception.
As I said, he gained his knowledge of Christianity from heretical sources, right?
Right.
And not from, shall we say, from Orthodox Christian sources. This is a subject we discussed. As we discussed, we could go into depth and specifically have a topic which discusses the relationship of Quran of Islam to Christianity and its views on the Bible and Jesus, but certainly there is no. We are considered polytheists. We are considered to be in Islam. We are not. Well, Islam rejects the Trinity and the death, the resurrection, and the divinity of Jesus, which means that to accept Islam, you have to completely reject any Christian concepts of theology.
Yeah, somebody's talking. Please keep it on topic, guys. We're not talking about Owen Benjamin right now. He can come on my show if you want. I wouldn't mind having him on. He seems like a pretty decent guy. Anyway, let's keep it on topic, folks. Simply for women, when Islam means the one who submits, as Lloyd said, that does not make them all Islamic.
Say it again. Where's that, please?
It's the second one up. When Islam means the one who submits, as Lloyd said, it does not make them all Islamic.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how they mean that. I'm not seeing that. Second one up is
now it's scrolled up. It's simply for women, okay. The pink or red one there.
Oh, there. When Islam means the one who submits, well, if you've submitted, you have chosen to commit to Islam, right? And it's all or nothing. You'll often find when I was doing my counter-terror course, many times I heard, well, you can pick and choose as you. No, you can't. You submit. You accept all of it.
And Bahare says, not the divinity. In fact, it is said in the Quran that Jesus ascended to the heavens. Maybe that's not divinity. What do you have to say to that? And I've read that too. I don't remember the passage, though. I need to go back through it.
Again, in Islam, at the end of days, Jesus will come back at the right hand of Muhammad. He will kill the pigs and break the cross and abolish the jizya. Right? He will come back essentially under Muhammad.
Muhammad.
Yes.
But at the right hand of God, which is truth, the right hand path.
Look, this again, something I would prefer to. Let me see if I can find that reference. I would rather find the reference and actually quote it than speak entirely from. No, I would prefer to tackle some of these when I've had time to get the sources together. Then I can actually quote the references. People can check them for themselves. But he will come back. He will break the cross, kill the pigs, and abolish the jizya. In other words, there will be no more dhimmis. A dhimmi is effectively a semi-slave under the protection of Islam. When it says Islam protects the people of the book, it's like paying protection to the mafia. If you don't comply, there will be punishment. There will be retaliation. But that's a subject again that I should actually go into the Sharia and bring out necessary references and actually discuss that from a
we'll do that next episode. We're almost at an hour and a half here, so we should probably wrap
it
up.
Hopefully I've covered some of these. So hopefully I've provided a foundation of the scripture and doctrine, where the scriptures are found, how they are looked at, and also provided a little bit of history. I gave a bit of a narrative from the early parts, just to give you an overview. And there's obviously much more we can go into and prep, but hopefully, do you feel that I've given a thorough overview.
Yeah, I do think we've given a thorough initial footing or foundation to build on the rest of the series from here. We've got about 6 minutes. If anyone has any valid questions that they want to ask, and again, we're not talking about 9/11 and this stuff. Let's just keep it on topic, please.
So with regards to simply for women, if someone submits to Islam but they do not practice, they are then a hypocrite. This is a well-defined term within Islam. They're a hypocrite, and hypocrites are punished the same as non-believers are.
Interesting.
Right. I mean, I will mention one last reference. Let me actually do that. So this would talk about apostasy. Okay. So anyone who leaves Islam, so it says leaving Islam is the ugliest form of unbelief, kufr, and it is the worst. This is chapter 8, called apostasy from Islam, which is the crime of ridda. Okay. 8.1 from the Sharia. When a person who has reached puberty and is sane voluntarily apostatizes from Islam, he deserves to be killed. In such a case, it is obligatory for the caliph or his representative to ask him to repent and return to Islam. If he does, it is accepted. If he refuses, he is immediately killed. There is no penalty, and what's called an indemnity, for killing an apostate, since it is killing someone who deserves to die. I could go on.
And do you want to share that on screen so that people can see it, so they don't, attack you or I for...
Yeah, let me share that.
It's it's just people are so upset, especially the simply for women person.
This is if I'm sure we can share a link to a copy to a good copy of the or people can find a copy of the Umdat al-Salik, or the Reliance of the Traveler, the Manual of Sacred Sharia Law. And it says here, chapter 8, apostasy from Islam, ridda. Leaving Islam is the ugliest form of unbelief and the worst. 8.1, and this is Sharia law. When a person has reached puberty and is sane, voluntarily apostatizes from Islam, he deserves to be killed. 8.2, in such a case, it is obligatory for the caliph to ask him to repent, and if he does not, he is immediately killed. There is no indemnity for killing an apostate, since it is killing someone who deserves to die. And we can go back to the Reliance, so we can look at chapter 1.0, who is subject to retaliation for injurious crimes. So let's look at 1.2. The following are not subject to retaliation for this crime. So you have a Muslim for killing a non-Muslim, a Jewish or Christian subject of the Islamic State for killing an apostate, because the subject of the state is under its protection, while killing an apostate from Islam is without consequence. And note this, okay, this is also who is not subject to retaliation for injurious crimes: a father or mother or their fathers of mothers for killing their offspring or their offspring's offspring. That is the legal basis for honor killings in Islam.
All right. So, if any Islamists out there, if any Islamists out there decide that they want to worship truth as God and follow Christianity, and we're going to go into this later, but the Bible is banned in like 53 countries, you mentioned. But, and is that true?
I don't know. I know it's illegal to have one in Saudi Arabia.
It's illegal to have a Bible.
Saudi Arabia, yeah. I've been to Saudi Arabia numerous times. Yeah,
I thought I saw notes from you somewhere in your notes somewhere that said that it was illegal in 53 countries to own a copy of the Bible.
Oh man, my database goes back years. I can't remember everything I have in it, so I try to search through it, and it depends how often I go to that particular section of information or how often I debate it.
Okay, yeah, that would be like
but that may well be true.
But, that would be like, it would be illegal for me to have this book here. But, if somebody, realized that they wanted to worship Logos as God, they could be killed for that. Is that correct?
Well, it's illegal. You can be, so if someone wants to worship Logos in certain Islamic countries, yeah, it's illegal. There are penalties, there are punishments. For instance, Saudi Arabia only recently, and we're talking in the last 2 months, started to allow home church services. So the first time in its history, it's allowing home church services, and that was, I think, in November they allowed that.
Now, all of these people, we keep asking them for specific citations how any of this is wrong, and they haven't provided anything yet. And somebody with an Arabic name here says, your face has absolutely no light because of all the falsehood you have said about Islam. May Allah guide you and heal your heart.
I get that a lot. That's fine. I appreciate that. Look, temper tantrum, or tamper tantrum. Okay, bad spelling. Verse 256 of Al-Baqarah includes there's no compulsion in religion. Now, I mean, that's a partial quote, first of all. Secondly, there's no compulsion. This was when Muhammad was weak. He was a religious leader. He had no army, he had no money, he had no insufficient supporters. And that's part of the Meccan Quran. In the Medinan Quran, that is all abrogated. So the law of abrogation takes precedence. And
now, a contradiction is always a liar and error, folks. And why are there contradictory citations within these texts themselves?
So if we take the time, I can show, and I have them listed in my database, my knowledge base, of numerous cases where Muhammad forces people to convert with the threat of death if they do not. And this is by Muhammad himself. So he says that, and that is true. But he also says something totally contradictory, and that's also true. But the contradictory portion where it abrogates is more true.
All right, and we should probably follow up with that in another episode. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everybody's comments. And please, folks, please, I'm going to say this for the last time, bring valid citations to the next episode of this series, and let's have a real conversation about these things. If you can show strong evidence in how Lloyd is in error on anything, just provide it, and then we will correct it. But so far, not one of you has provided anything that is substantiated in what you've shared. And I find that, sad and dishonest, and I hope that all of you can do better. Bahare, I really appreciate your efforts tonight. I appreciate all of the contributions and donations to the show tonight. Please, let's keep it straight. Let's keep it to the truth. That's what we're interested in. Lloyd, I appreciate your time tonight. I know that this is a stressful topic for you, and talking about this stuff, and I'm sure you probably get lots of hate and threats and all else for that. Thank you, Polygonal, for the donations.
I'm simply interested in the truth. I'm not seeking to offend anyone, but I'm quoting directly from the prime Islamic sources, and that's what it says.
Yeah.
I think you should realize what it is and be able to make up their minds with the facts.
Right. Exactly. And just please, folks, do what I've asked here, and let's do better next time. Let's do better next week with your counter arguments. I don't want to see any more name calling and empty accusations. We're not 3 years old here. We're all grown ups. You can do better. And again, thank you everyone for your support. And we'll see you next week at the same bat time, same bat channel. And see you then. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.